Ken said about what Ian had to pinpoint here. And depending on how you feel about him, this is what he had to say in a quote. I wish Ian would refrain from talking about the legal situation of my characters like he knows the bottom line. And the fact is, okay, let me reread that. I'm sure you guys can see it yourself right now. But let me reread that. And also, as I check on something too, where's my remote here somewhere? Oh, there it is. Maybe, hold on guys, let me do something real quickly. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. When you have a security camera, obviously the volume goes a little louder even when you down it. There we go. So, there we go. Just got to do something. Like I said, it's opportunity I'm taking right now. But anyway, this is what Ken had to say, and I quote, as I check something. I was trying to check something. Hold on. Go. I just want to make sure I can hear it. But anyway, like I said, this is what Ken had to say about what Ian said in his recent Bumblecat podcast back on the 2nd, and I quote. This is what he had to say, because I guess he said something about the legality of what was going on with Ken's characters that, unfortunately got removed from the comic because of what happened behind the scenes. This is what Ken had to say in response, and I quote, I wish Ian would... Okay, let me restart. Sorry about that. Let me restart. But this is what he had to say to Ken, I guess, getting asked a question or talking about the situation. Basically about, the whole legality of Ken's characters and all that. This is what Ian, and I guess it was a question a fan asked, but here's what Ken had to say in response to that answer that Ken gave to that question, I guess, in the Bubblecast. And I quote, this is what he says, and I quote, I wish Ian would refrain from talking about the legal situation of my characters like he knows the bottom line. And the fact is, he doesn't. And it's clear he doesn't when he talks about the post-reboot characters' rights. So basically, it sounds like what he's getting at here is, basically he's calling out, in a sense, Ian Flynn for, believing everything he's saying, but not knowing the facts. Basically he doesn't know the entire facts. Like, he doesn't, basically, as you read it right here, he's just saying, he just wishes Ian wouldn't talk about something he has no idea that has no idea about out anyway, like behind the scenes and all that, doesn't have any clue. And the fact, and it's not just for his characters, but it's also for like the other characters, the post-reboot character rights as well. So in other words, like characters that were created for the soft retcon reboot that Ian doesn't own the rights to, or if he does at all. And continuing on, this is what he said. I don't know if this is in order. I have to see. Yes, yeah, it's in order. It's in order. So let's get back to that. Hold on. And now she's watching the Giants game. It's on right now. But the Giants and the Diamondbacks, that is. Okay, so here's continuing on. Here's what he had to say. So again, this is what he said at first. Basically, he wished Ian would refrain from talking about the legal situation of his characters like he knows the bottom line, and the fact is he doesn't, and it's clear he doesn't when he talks about the post-reboot characters' rights. In other words, like perhaps characters that others made for the soft retcon reboot starting with 252. Continuing on, and I quote, this is what Ken had to say continuing on. Ian clearly... Okay. Let me read that. Ian clearly also doesn't know what a fair deal is when it comes to licensing rights. What he is doing is avoiding having to say he has no interest in using any of the Archie Sonic characters without getting people mad at him. Let me make sure everything's cool there. Okay, looks like it might be. You want to double check. Yeah, because people did comment a little bit. And I'll get into that in a moment. Let me make sure. Okay, this is what he says after this part here. This is what he says here. Again, let me reread that. Ian clearly also doesn't know what a fair deal is when it comes to licensing rights. What he's doing is avoiding having to say he has no interest in using any of the Archie Sonic characters without getting people mad at him. And what he's talking about there is, he feels that Ian doesn't have a clue what a fair deal is, like when it comes to licensing, right? Like an agreement, like a fair agreement of, okay, we'll use your characters and you'll get paid this much. He's also bringing up the fact that it seems that Ian is avoiding having to say he has no interest in using any of the Archie Sonic characters without getting people mad at him. In other words, what he's stating is that Ian would rather just do his own thing instead of go back and use characters that people know and love, even if he has to make a deal with some people to do that, him or IDW. And hello, Big Box Network. Thank you for being in the live chat. And super chats are on, guys, if you want to donate. If you choose to. Continuing on, and I quote, There is a fair formula for the cost of licensing Mina or Ventacat or Horizontal Al or Julie Sue or whoever. Just like there's a royalty formula for the creators of an issue's content. I've seen these formulas and received checks based on those formulas. So basically what he is saying is that, basically he's just saying that, look, there is a way things go if we want to use characters, and it looks like from his standpoint, Ian doesn't want to do that. We check something here. Oh, okay. Never mind. Yeah, but Ian is saying basically that it seems to Ken that Ian, doesn't want to address the situation. It's like, it's kind of, you see it yourself exactly what Ken's saying here in response to what Ian said on his Bumblecast, and it's basically the fact that Ken feels that Ian just doesn't grasp the understanding of, hey, you want to make a deal to use the characters, fine, let's work out a deal, let's make a fair agreement to where all parties are okay with, all parties get a fair shake. But to him, Ian doesn't want to do that. And then he says there's a fair formula for the cost of licensing Mina or Ventacat Al or Horizon Al or Julisu or whomever, just like there's a royalty formula for the creators of an issue's content. I've seen these formulas and received checks based on those formulas. And then I think somebody responded, that's something else. Okay, here we go. There's two responses here, but okay, let's continue on. Let's see. All right, let's continue on. Here we go. Okay, so we're all right. So basically, we're from here to here, and we just talked here, right? Okay, so continuing on, and I quote, for Ian to address anything having to do with royalties would upset the apple cart at IDW because they don't pay royalties, put that in caps, to anyone, ever. Stan Goldberg never received a dime for them reprinting his work in a book that spotlighted Stan's work. Imagine that. And then he continues on. It also appears Ian considers what happened at Archie. Okay, let me read that, and I quote. It also appears Ian considers what happened at Archie happened a lifetime ago. Last time I checked, 5 years did not equal a decade. If he wants to act like he knows what he's talking about, he should start by stating Archie never made anyone sign contracts prior to him. So basically what it is here with what's going on here with Ken addressing what Ian had to say is that Ian is trying to avoid the situation. Like, basically to him, Ian is trying to move on from what happened. It's like anytime people ask him questions about it, he wants to avoid it. Or if he has to answer it, he tries to answer it in a way that doesn't make sense or has no, you know, has no connection to what happened previously. And for Ken to see that someone like Ian Flynn would say, "Oh, well, that happened. What happened behind the scenes at Archie was a lifetime ago." Ken does have a point. You don't just brush off what happened 5 years ago as a lifetime ago. If you know what I mean, you don't just brush that off. Uh, from what I can probably understand, what Ian's trying to say here is what happened at Archie, like with the retcon and the reboot that they went through, that was near a decade ago, and he wants to move on. Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Here's the thing, and it all started basically again with this. Right here, where he's saying that he wishes Ian would refrain from talking about the legal situation of his characters, like he knows the bottom line, and the fact is he doesn't, and it's clear he doesn't when he talks about the post-reboot characters' rights as well. So in other words, what he's saying is that, Ian doesn't understand what really goes on behind the scenes. Like, you can't just, go and use a character without, somebody wanting royalties out of it. And then he continues on, and I quote, Ian clearly doesn't know what a fair deal is when it comes to licensing rights. What he's doing is avoiding having to say he has no interest in using any of the Archie Sonic characters without people getting mad at him. And what he means by that is Ian just doesn't want to come out and come straight out and say, yeah, the Freedom Fighters who were the SatAM characters and are kind of owned by, and technically owned by Sega, but people, associate them being Archie characters. Yeah, I have no plans to use them, despite, so many times of saying I want to fight for them and all that. Stuff like that, or other characters that people associate with the comic. Basically Ken's saying, hey, Ian, why don't you just come out and say you don't have no interest? You just want to move on. It's like, why don't you just, it's like, that's what he's saying. It's like, why, basically that's what he's saying. It's like, why don't you just, it's like, he's just asking him, why don't you just say you don't want to use them and you just want to move on? That's it. That's it. I was just checking the super chats there, and I do apologize for, like I said, any lag of this, any. But that's about it. That's all he wants him to do. Right? That's all he would want to do. I mean, wouldn't you want somebody to do that? And now, here's the thing. Let's see. Alright, so we had plenty of responses. Ken just connected it all in one thread. We had plenty of responses. One person here responded by saying, Ken, if you're going to try to use our show to get the Sonic fanbase riled up in your favor, the least you could do is join our Patreon. And then Ken's response is, another know-nothing heard from. You sounded like a lap rather than someone who does the homework. That's the problem with so-called journalists today. More opinion and less information. Yeah, and some people have criticized him. There's no doubt. There are some defenders. There's no doubt about that. And then we have here, there are some people, even, somebody like, everybody has their opinions on both guys and how they feel about them. There's all that. And everybody has a right to that. There's no doubt about that. And let's see. And basically, they're saying that Ken doesn't know how to take a joke, and probably he doesn't. He's probably, he's probably has a, I wouldn't say a thick skin, but he probably has a sensitive skin, like, like, let's say a certain Kevin Smith deal, but not on the same, but not as bad, I guess. And then somebody here replied, I guess in defense or whatever, Derby dude here, I don't know if it was in defense or something, but this is what they said, and I quote, "Many fans have suspected for several years that he's been tiptoeing around the issue of the freedom fighters because he knows fans want them, but he doesn't. And he makes excuses not to include them, including spreading misinformation about who actually owns them." And then Dream Soul Hill, I think, also replied, appears somewhere. Yeah. Says, he's trying to avoid pissing people off. And then Derby Dude says, well, he's pissing people off anyway by lying and pretending he cares, when he clearly doesn't. Or he'd be fighting tooth and nail to get the freedom fighters into the comics, which is funny because he wouldn't have to fight Sega to do this, as Sega owns the properties, and those properties could make Sega much more money than they care to admit, if they would properly utilize them. Everything Flynn has said about why he can't use them has been completely debunked by internet sleuths. He has no more excuses other than to admit he doesn't like them. And he's afraid to admit he doesn't like them, in my opinion, because then that would mean admitting that he's been lying about how much he likes them for over a decade. Killing Sally 3 times, twice chronologically, and once in his fan art date. And he's proved to me he was being dishonest, FTS. And again, everybody has their opinions. Some agree with Ken Penders' rant here, and that's fine, and some don't. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. What Ken's saying that, Ken has a right. Ken has a right to say what he wants to say. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. And then he says this, I think afterwards, he says, this is what Ken says, I think afterwards. He says, and I quote, "Seriously, I wish Sega and IDW would make an attempt for my characters. My lawyers would love a quick and easy payday. There's a lot Ian doesn't say because he doesn't know the law or the actual facts of the case. No one has the receipts I do when it comes to my characters." And then we have some replies here, a lot of replies actually. So basically again, you're going to have a division. You're going to have a division here with fans, kind of understanding where Ken's coming from and not, and being like, look, it doesn't, matter or anything. Stuff like that. Sorry about that there. Now, one person here says, I don't know if this is satire or sarcastic or something, but here's what one person had to say, and I quote, this is Sally for All replying to Ken, and what Ken had to say here. This is what Sally for All had to say, and I quote, "The noble act of allowing Sega IDW the usage of your characters is a major milestone for Archie fans. Julie Sue, Jeffrey, Sally's family, coupled with the fact that the Freedom Fighters are owned by Sega, as you confirmed last year, proves there's no excuse why they can't return." And some people, let's see, and then that's now asking, did they miss something? And this person saying, "You'd be honestly doing a great favor if you allowed Sonic Chronicles to get the sequel it needs." And then he says, look, he's basically saying, look, if they want to do it, they know where to find me. I'll refer them to my lawyers. To my lawyers. Okay, let me read that. Went off track there. He says, if people want to do it, they know where to find, or they know where to reach me. I'll refer them to my lawyers to draw up the contracts. It's no different than when a piece of music or a movie clip is used in a new film. They pay license fees for that. And I think, let me see, did he continue? No. Okay. Now somebody actually responded by saying, Ken, it's been 8 years since those characters were dropped from the comics. It's time to move on. And then Ken's response is, I have moved on. I'm doing my own thing with my characters. I'm not the one pining to work on Sonic or with Sega or IDW. I'm fine the way things are. In other words, he's saying he's moved on. He's cool. So, again, depending on how you read what he's saying or looking at what he's saying, and again, depending on how you feel about, those that, go back and forth defending him or being against him, you know, Ken seemingly doesn't have a problem. All he's saying in his own Penders-like way is, hey, I've learned that, if you want to use my character, it's not a problem. Reach out to me, contact me, let's agree to something, let's write up the contract if you want to do that, which again probably will happen or would happen. And then, pretty much per the agreement, you know, my characters are free to be used or will be usable in your media, in your property. It's basically the same situation with copyright like here on YouTube. And I think that's what Ken is trying to get at. It's like, here with the copyright here on YouTube. A lot of us, um, could make all the fan projects, fan vids, AMVs, PMVs we want. But, in the end, the music or the clips we use are owned by somebody else. So that when we see copyright on them, copyright claimed, but it's still allowed to be seen, then yeah, that's basically what he's saying. That's basically, I kind of guess what he's saying is, look, you know, even though my characters can be seen, IDW, Ian Flynn, you know, Tracy Yardlin, all of them, they might get a percentage, but they won't get the kind of percentage as much as, let's say, Ken would get. In other words, it wouldn't be maybe 50-50, it'd be more like 60-40 or 70-30, but Ken would get the 70, if you know what I mean, because it's his characters they'd be using. So, yeah, he's basically what started all this is the fact that when Ian said what he did on his Bumblecast recently, that pretty much, opened the floodgates, if you will, reopened the floodgates. For people to, for Ken to come out and say, look, I have no problem with this or that. You know, you know, it's basically a convoluted mess. We'll put it like that. But he's just asking for people like Ian Flynn not to come out and say, hey, this is what happened, and this is how I see. This is what happened. I know what happened. Da 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 da. He wants him to stop doing that and just be honest about the situation, just like anybody else would be honest about the situation. Because everybody has pretty much looked at Ian Flynn, coming out over the past several years and saying, hey, I'm trying to get the Freedom Fighters in, I'm trying to get Sally in, I'm trying to get Bunny in, trying to get Antoine, Dulcie, Rhoda, and all them in, Lupin, and all them, but we have yet to see any result. And he seemingly is going back and forth, like he's saying one thing and he's not doing, and he's doing something else. He's doing the opposite. Or he says he promises to try to get this to happen, and yet he's not following through on that. And what people are pointing out, if you will, what they're pointing out is, And I think Ken, in a way, is even pointing this out too, when you read what he has to say, is that they have access to a lot of characters that were made in the book when it was running at Archie, when it was at Archie Comics, and yet they have not taken, he's not made a play for them, and that's what's weird, and that is what's suspicious to him. They've not made a play for them, you know, because this is what he's saying here. He's saying, and I quote, following up. Ian clearly doesn't know what a fair deal is when it comes to licensing rights. What he's doing is avoiding having to say he has no interest in using any of the Archie Sonic characters without getting people mad at him. And that's basically it. That's kind of a good point. It's like Ian, you know, is avoiding the fact that he's just not coming out and saying, hey, I just don't want to use the characters because I don't want people to get mad at me at the way I might use them, you know, and he wants to focus on something differently. Now, I'm sure there's no doubt. Uh, in my opinion, in my honest opinion here, there's no doubt in my honest opinion, not Ken, but Ian's going to respond to this. He's going to respond to this on his next Bumblecast, and he'll probably have to eventually address the situation, and hopefully if that happens, Ian admits, look, I want to use the characters, but what I've planned, here's what I'm trying to say. If I'm Ian Flynn, I may have to address this eventually. And again, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if he addresses it on his next Bumblecast. And if he does, maybe he should use that opportunity to just come out and admit, look, I want to use the characters, but if I use them, I'm probably going to use them in a way that would piss fans off. And that's all he has to say. It's kind of like with the Kevin Smith situation. If Kevin Smith would have just said, hey, this is what Kevin Smith, Ted Basali, and those working on the series at both Netflix and Mattel would have just came out and said, hey, this is what Revelation's going to really be, and not exactly what I said it was going, or not exactly what we said it was going to be, they would have avoided so much backlash. And that's a fact. They would have avoided so much backlash. And that's basically what you're getting here with Ian, is, from the eyes of someone like even Kim Penders. Like, if Ian would just come out and say the truth and stop tiptoeing, dancing around it, prancing around it, maybe people wouldn't be so critical about him. I mean, heck, I listen to, what is her name, Crystal Maiden 77 on YouTube at times, and her newbie perspective reviews. And even she has pretty much called out Ian Flynn for some of the decisions he's made. I mean, she's even said that when it was revealed in 247 that, Sally was the traitor Silver was looking for, that she believes Ian pulled that out of his you-know-what. And that was just something that was probably not even on the radar, if you know what I mean. And she's probably right. But we don't know. We don't know if that's true or not, if that was just a last-minute decision or not. But the way things are going, I don't think anybody would probably put it past that. But yeah, here's the thing. Ken has a right to his opinions. And let's be honest, whether you like Ken or you don't, whether you're like Ian or you don't, whether you're kind of, in the middle with them, like, you like what they've done, but you don't like what they've done, kind of like the good and bad. Like, you'd like to talk about the good they've done, and sometimes you have to talk about the bad stuff, like that. Depending, how you feel about them. Ken, you have to admit, Ken has more experience in the comic book industry, has more experience writing for a comic of any kind than Ian Flynn does. Ian was doing his Other M webcomic while Kim Penders was working on the Archie Sonic book. So, Ian, doesn't have as much experience as Ken. And Ken, with years of experience, maybe a decade or two of experience, knows exactly how things work behind the scenes. And here's the thing. here's the thing. When he comes out and says that Ian doesn't, it's not, you know, that Ian is not coming out and straight up admitting he doesn't want to use the characters from the Archie book. Whether it's the Archie made characters that Ken or other people have made that they would have to pay licensing and royalties fees for, or characters even he made. The reason he doesn't want to do that is he doesn't want to upset fans. He doesn't want to get people mad at him, and that even includes the characters of Sad AM, like Sally, Bunny, Antoine, and all them. And then when he comes out and says this, when he comes out and follows that up by saying this, that there is a fair formula for the cost of licensing characters like Mina or Vertical or Horizon Owl or Julie Sue or whomever, just like there's a royalty formula for the creators of an issue's content. I've seen these formulas and received checks based on those formulas. In other words, he has said, because of his experience, because he's worked on other comics like the Star Trek comics and many other comics before this or around this time as well, that he's seen how this all works, and based on the formulas of based on those formulas that he's worked with, those directives, those agreements, he's gotten money out of it. Like, they could use his ideas and his characters and come back to them later on, and he's made money off of it. He's gotten royalties out of it. And then when he follows that up by saying, for Ian to address anything having to do with royalties would upset the apple cart at IDW because they, and he capitalized these three words, don't pay royalties to anyone ever. Stan Goldberg never received a dime for them reprinting his work in a book that spotlighted Stan's work. Imagine that. And we've all heard, Clownfish TV has talked about this and others have talked about this. IDW behind the scenes is not in a good place. Like they may seemingly on the outside be in a good place and they're trying to venture off into other areas of media like shows and movies and stuff, but that behind the scenes they're not in a good place. They're not as great as they seem to be, or not as on the up and up as they seem to be, because according to Ken, they don't pay royalties at all for anybody's work, which is why Ian doesn't want to address anything having to do with royalties, because IDW wouldn't pay royalties for characters to be used. Excuse me now. And then he concludes this by saying, it also appears Ian considers what happened at Archie, happened a lifetime ago. Last time I checked, 5 years did not equal a decade. If he wants to act like he knows what he's talking about, he should start by stating Archie never made anyone sign contracts prior to him. And Ken is saying that from experience, because Ken, along with others like Mike Gallagher and others before Ken's time and after Ken's time, like Carl Bowlers and all of them, they never had to sign contracts. They were brought in as freelance writers and artists. So, he kind of, whether we like to admit it or not, he knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's talking about, if you will. And there are people, like I said, that have responded to what Ken had to say here after hearing what Ian had to say on his podcast. Like Space Fox here said, and I quote, "Well, as you know, Mr. Penders, IDW is a totally new world based off the game Sonic Forces. Unlike Archie, that was based off Sad AM, this world is different. Therefore, Archie characters wouldn't quite work. I mean, I'd love to see the Freedom Fighters back, but I doubt it would ever happen." And then, of course, they had a couple of replies after that. One's by Nintendo Dude, who says, "You never know what the future could hold," which is true. And then you have System 509 say, "I'm starting to think it's best we all just move on from everything Archie related. From where I'm standing, it just looks like a hot mess of weird characters and Let me read that. This is what System 509 had to say in response to Nintendo Dude. And I quote, "I'm starting to think it's best we all just move on from everything Archie related. From where I'm standing, it just looks like a hot mess of weird characters and complicated legal issues." And then Alex basically had to say, the characters from Archie aren't that weird, and the legal issues aren't even that complicated. And then System basically said, well, of course you'd say that, Alex. You grew up reading the thing, but for me, from the outside looking in, it just seemed like an incoherent jumble of stuff that has no business being in Sonic. As for the legal stuff, well, nobody's explained it well, apparently, so no wonder. And then Alex had to basically say, look, I didn't actually grow up with Archie. I didn't even grow up on Sat AM. I grew up on Sonic X in the GameCube and Game Boy era. I didn't get into them until they were midway through the reboot. And if you wanted an explanation regarding the case, all you had to do was ask. And then he gives a couple of examples and everything with videos and all that, which I may check out myself later on. So I'm gonna, if I can, I guess I can't retweet that. Um, yeah, I guess I can't retweet that. So let me put these for later. Hold on, guys, while I do this. Anyway, though, yeah, it's just one of those convoluted kind of situations that's going on in the book, if you will. Well, not going on in the book, but basically, the situation is this. It's, you know, Ian Flynn just, not Ian Flynn, but Kim Penders just feels Ian Flynn, if anybody like Ian Flynn is going to talk about the characters or talk about what happened behind the scenes, they need to know the exact details and not just go off what they know. So, yeah, whether you agree with Ken or not, he does have a bit of a point. He does have a bit of a point that Ian needs to basically be like, look, this is what I know, and that's all I'm going to say. So, hopefully, you guys got a kick out of that. Again, go ahead and read it, pause it if you want. When you can, and read it as much as you can. So anyway, we're gonna move on from that because I'm getting a little off track with it. But yeah, again, Ian Flynn, and I think it's not just Ken, but a lot of people feel this way. Ian Flynn should just come out and say, look, I don't want to use the characters because if I use them, I might use them in a way that would piss the fans off, and I don't want to do that. Just come out and say it. Just say, look, you want to use the characters, but you don't want to do it right now because because you'll probably use them in a way that characters don't like. So we'll see. Hopefully we'll see the character soon, but who knows? Who knows? Let me check something in my phone just died. My phone just died. But anyway, yeah, let's move on from that. But yeah, it is interesting to see that that's happening and everything. All right, so let's move on to the one that starts right here.